These handouts were from last week, so if you've got last week's green sheet, that's what we're going back to. We'll do the back side of it tonight. There's nothing to fill out, no blanks or anything like that. It's just an outline to follow. You could even note the scriptures for yourselves that we're going to be looking at. Did you get it? I didn't understand a word of that. So you can't do it? Okay, no biggie. What he was checking for me was a video. If you want to make a note of it, the guy's name is Dr. Frank Turek, T-U-R-E-K, and it's a YouTube video. He is dealing with the question that we've been dealing with about transgenders. They're taking questions from an audience of students, and one of the students asked how he should respond to a friend of his who thinks he's transgender or thinks he's a girl. And I thought the answer was so well done. He answers part of it, Dr. Frank Turek does, and then there are two other guys who address the same issue. It's about a 7.5 to 8 minute video. So if you want to look that up on your own, I think you'll find it very interesting and informative. Sometimes, what's that? Yeah. Is it going to work? Even if it just works on these side speakers, that would be plenty. And, oh yeah, this is it. I agree with exactly everything he says, except the very last point.
Gino.
And we'll talk
so
about that
my question
when he's
was
done.
regarding the recent Target thing where if you feel gender is opposite of what you really are, you can go into the bathroom. And what my question is about is...
Here we go. You just asked that question about gender and about bathrooms to Frank Turek.
Yes. And to you guys
You
as well.
open your PowerPoint?
Two North Carolinians up here.
Anyways, my question is, like, if I don't know someone who's dealing with this, but if I ever was to meet someone who was dealing with, let's say they're a guy and they say, I feel like a girl. What can I talk to them about? Like, do I use like a combo tactic, or should I send an email to them?
I just have a quick question. This email you're thinking about sending, is this at your place of occupation?
Don't send it.
Well, I think that there's a video going around on the internet now by the Washington Family Policy Council. I don't know if you happen to see it, but it actually is a video where a guy goes to the University of Washington and starts asking people, is it okay for anybody to use any bathroom? They all say, oh, yeah, it is. And the guy says, he's a 5'9" white guy. He says, suppose I were to tell you I'm a woman. And most of the students say, well, that's fine with me. Suppose I were to say that I was a Chinese woman. And then they get a little bit more questioning. And then suppose I would say I was a 6'5" Chinese woman. Then they suddenly get real resistant. Well, you're really not 6'5". Why? Because of outer appearance. Well, if they were to take his clothes off, don't go there. It's
true.
They would see by physical appearance he's really a man and not a woman, right?
That's right.
Now, we have to have the utmost compassion for people that deal with this issue. But according to Dr. Paul McHugh, who is one of the directors of psychiatry or worked in Johns Hopkins University for many years as easy for me to say, as a psychiatrist, and that institution did so-called sex change operations. They stopped doing those sex change operations because they realized that the result was worse, the cure was worse than the disease. And he points out that this idea that you're different from your biological sex is a psychological disorder. It would be like anorexia. If I'm 89 pounds and I think I'm fat, that's a psychological disorder. The physical truth is I'm 89 pounds and I should be a lot more. My mental state is I'm overweight. That's a psychological condition. Now, people get all insulted when you suggest you have a psychological condition. However, why do we do that? Why is it that if you say I have a bad heart, there's no shame in that, but if I have a bad brain, there is shame in that? Why? I don't think there should be.
You know, one of the things
Shane.
that really bothers me about this the most is the fact that the American Psychological Association, it has become such a political lobby. And isn't it interesting that around 1972 that they lobbied, not based upon scientific breakthrough, but simply through political maneuvering to say that homosexuality is no longer an emotional or psychological disorder. And then they move on to the next thing, okay, and it's gender identity. Did anyone notice that no sooner did they declassify those things as being mental illnesses, that they started to develop new terms and circulate them in the court of public opinion? We had all of a sudden homophobia. Now we have transphobia. Something goes from being a disorder, and then suddenly the next day, any opposition to it is a psychological disorder. Make no mistake about it, these individuals are trying to say that your Christian worldview is a psychological disorder. This is war. And understand, it is a war of competing worldviews. And we need to understand that this whole thing is not about where the transgendered pee. It is about postmodernism and the question of whether things have essences.
In fact,
In other words, are they objectively true or are they subjectively true? You know, I have a white car. That's an objective claim about the object called my car. I can't change the color of my car by changing my opinion. White cars are cool. That's a subjective claim. I, as the subject, think that white cars are cool. Is sexual identity, how you are built as a creature, objective or subjective? Is it grounded in my opinion or is it grounded in the object called Jim? That's the question here. And the culture has forgotten the distinction between objective claims and subjective claims. Now everything is up for grabs. That's why the video, this is
Truth
part of my
and
talk.
preference.
This is part of my talk at Summit. By the way, young people need to go to Summit. You've said it twice. I'll say it a third time. Because this is part of that talk, and here's why. That video is brilliant because he begins, am I a woman? And everyone is willing to say, well, yeah, if you think you are. Am I a Chinese woman? Another physical difference is race. Well, I would say, well, I'm not sure. Do you have some Chinese descent? No, I'm just saying I think I am. It's a little harder for them to buy. Am I a 7-year-old Chinese girl? They start to flinch. Why? Because they understand now they have to take everything that's objectively true about him and turn it into a subjective opinion. And they're not willing to do it. Am I a 6'5", 7-year-old Chinese woman? When they start to say, well, yeah, really? That's where we've gotten? Because it's the slippery slope we started on. If you can see that your sexual gender is up to you, then so is my height. Hey, why can't I just say I'm a dog and go to the bathroom right here on the stage? You won't prosecute a dog for doing that.
We'd hit you with a paper.
There you go. So
I feel
again, I don't get to decide the physical, objective nature of who I am by changing my opinion of who I am. But that's the logical slippery slope we're on right now, folks, because the same guy who does that on the stage could argue, well, wait a minute. He thinks he's a girl. Not that you think you're a girl. But the point is, so if he thinks that, why can't I think this? What's the difference? It's a physical difference. He's not that in reality, but I'm not this in reality, but it's all a matter of opinion.
But notice the one aspect of this that people weren't willing to challenge is based on sex, see? Because the religion of sex has replaced any other worldview. And by the way, just so you know, the religion of sex is a religion of the sword, meaning they will burn you at the stake as a heretic if you don't fall in line. And the easiest way to counter this is to stand up for the truth. If every Christian stood up for the truth, none of this would be happening. We're the problem.
There we go. Every time I watch a video like that, I have to go back and watch it again and see what I missed, because I don't know about you, but when something like that's on, I'm listening so intently that I just can't pull it all in. I'm absorbing and I can't absorb it all, so I got to go back and listen to it 3 or 4 more times, and every time I listen to it, I get just a little bit more, and it's, what do you think about that? It does make sense. But I think the problem is we have become so subjective in our culture that anything anybody thinks is what goes. And there are a couple of passages that come to mind. The first one, of course, I think about Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20, where Isaiah says they've put evil for good and good for evil, sweet for bitter and bitter for sweet. And he goes right on down the line, and that's essentially what's happening. But there are some other things that I think about that also come to mind. If you look at 2 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul is here describing in the first century the struggle they had, which is exactly the same struggle we have. The details may have changed, but it's the same exact spiritual struggle. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, start at verse 3. Though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying what? In the New American Standard, the next word is speculations. What is a speculation? What is a spec house? Put it in terms of realty. Reality, yes, but realty. What's a spec house? Anybody know? It's a house that you build speculating that you'll be able to sell it. You don't have a buyer, but you're going to build it because you think you will have a buyer. That's speculating. Paul is saying the things that God gives us are mighty to the pulling down of speculations. What are some of the speculations we're talking about, not only in this class, but in other areas of life and culture? Did God create humanity, or did we evolve from monkeys? Evolution is a speculation. Is my sex up to me, or is it determined by my biology and my physiology? Well, it's determined by my physiology and my biology. It's not up to me. When I say I can decide whether I'm a man or a woman, that's a speculation. And Paul is saying, along with all other speculations, that this is what the Word of God is mighty to do. It's mighty to tear these things down. We're destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against what? The knowledge of God. This is exactly what we're talking about. That's what these guys were talking about. This isn't about where people go to the bathroom. This is about being able to say there is no right and wrong. And if there is no right and wrong, the Bible is not truth, and you Christians are crazy. Now, here's what happens to us sometimes. It happens to me all the time, and I got to keep reminding myself. We think, oh, this is just about our American culture. No. This is exactly the same thing that goes back to the Garden of Eden. This is God and the devil. God gives Adam and Eve everything they need for a marvelous, totally fulfilled existence. And the devil comes along and says, no, this is the way you do it. Not the way God said, the way I'm telling you to do it. God's your enemy. And they listened to the devil. They ate of the fruit, and everything went to pot. God comes back, and he says, I'm going to try to restore some of this. I'm going to make you some clothes, take care of this. And before we know it, we're in chapter 6. What happens in chapter 6 of Genesis? People are so far from God that God says, I got to wipe everybody out except for these 8 people who will be faithful to me. And then he calls Abraham, and he says, I'm going to make of you a great nation, and I'm going to bring from you a man who's going to bless the whole world. And what does that nation do in the course of its history but continually leave God? It's the same struggle that there's always been. It's God and the devil influencing the thoughts of humanity and their ideas. That's what it's always been. That's what it always will be. It's what it is today. This isn't just about American culture. This is about the devil. This is about demonic teachings, demonic ideas. When Paul talked about doctrines of demons, he wasn't just throwing a phrase out there. He was talking about something that is a literal truth. There are teachings that come from demonic sources. What we're dealing with in this class are some of those demonic teachings. Can I say the demon that did this, that brought this? No, but it's what did James say about the tongue? He said it's set on fire of hell. And it sets on fire the course of nature. And what are these things that we're struggling against except stupid, false lies and ideas that have been introduced through somebody's tongue into the world, and people have lapped it up because here's a way we can get away from having to be chained by God. And one of the reasons people think they're chained by God is because of the false ideas about Christianity that the devil has fed the world. And they've sucked it up. Most of the things that I read, whether on a written page or on the internet or in movies and shows, most of the things, I would say 99% or more, that people have against Christianity, what they're talking about isn't really Christianity. It's some false idea that people have introduced into Christianity, and people buy it as Christianity, but it's not Christianity. It's not Bible. And I tell people, go back and read your Bible. Real, legitimate Christianity is not what you're describing here. It's not what you think it is. And that's what Paul is talking about. We're destroying speculations, every lofty thing that raised up against the knowledge of God. We're taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. We are ready to punish all disobedience whenever your obedience is complete. You're looking at things as they are outwardly. If anyone's confident in himself that he is in Christ, let him consider this again within himself, that just as he is Christ, so also are we. So don't look at things outwardly. Don't look at things according to the flesh. Look at things with a spiritual eye. What's going on here? Is this about people's rights to go to the bathroom they want to, or is this really about more than that? And I believe it's about much more than that. Those things in mind, go back to the last sheet here. I've got another handout I hope to give you before we break. It's a very interesting article about research that was done, but that'll come in a little bit. We're on the page. The Bible addresses sexual behavior. God addresses behavior, but never temptation as sin. We're all tempted in various ways, and most everyone is tempted in a sexual way to which she must refuse to respond. We cannot help but have our attractions, but we are in control of our response to these attractions. I didn't say it specifically, but one of the reasons I wrote that is if someone has homosexual tendencies, or if they tend to think, well, I'm a girl when they're really a man, or I'm a man when they're really a girl, it's common for all of us to have ideas that we should not be acting on with regard to sex. A happily married man will look at a woman that's not his wife, and he'll be attracted to her. Is that normal? Well, of course that's normal. We know that it happens to almost every faithful married man. But what's he do with that attraction? Well, he puts it away. He puts it behind him. He doesn't give any vent to it. It's like the old saying, you can't stop the birds from flying over your head, but you can keep them from making a nest in your hair. It's getting easier and easier for me to do. But you see the idea of that. Thoughts will occur to you. Temptations will come. But you don't dwell on that. You don't entertain that. You put that away and you go on. And everybody's got thoughts that they shouldn't have. It may not even be about sex. Maybe you really would like to strangle somebody. Maybe that's it. But you're not going to act on it because you know that wouldn't be right. Maybe you'd really like to tell somebody off, but you're not going to do that because you know that wouldn't be right. You try to treat them with love in spite of the way you feel. That's all we're saying with that first statement there. That having feelings like that, having tendencies, that's not the sin. The sin is when we give in to those and we act on those. That's why when I talk about homosexuality, I talk about the practice of homosexuality. Because I don't want anybody to get the idea that if they have homosexual tendencies, that those tendencies are sinful. They're not. They can lead to sin if they allow themselves to act on those, but so can any lustful tendency. If you act on it, that leads to sin. But the lust itself, the desire, the temptation, if you'll control that, you'll be all right. The first arrow there is that Jesus defined marriage, and this is Matthew 19. And he was asked a question about men getting rid of their wives. And what he does to answer this question about divorcing your wife or putting your wife away is to go back to the original plan. Matthew 19:3, some Pharisees came to Jesus, testing him and asking him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? And he answered and said, have you not read? What does that imply? These guys should have read that. They should know this. Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. What's he quoting? He's quoting Genesis. He's quoting the original plan that God put down in Genesis. So he's doing two things, really. He's telling us this is what marriage is, and he's also confirming or reaffirming the statements in Genesis that God created everything in the first 6 days, and he created man and woman in his own image and intended for them to be together, two becoming one. That's what he says in verse 6. They're no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. So that's God's plan. Jesus is asked about divorce. He says, let's not talk about divorce, let's talk about marriage. Here's what marriage is supposed to be. It's one man, one woman, together for life, being faithful to one another. That's what marriage is. It's as if he's asking these guys, are you keeping marriage? You're asking about divorce. You need to ask yourself if you're keeping marriage as God wants you to keep marriage. Goes on to say, they said to him, why then did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce and send her away? Why did he do that, according to verse 8? Their hearts were hard. These guys were saying, I'm tired of this woman, I want to get rid of her. She hadn't done me any wrong, but I'm tired of her, so I want to get rid of her. Well, what is her option? Well, now, nobody can marry her. She might be a dandy woman. There's probably 20 guys looking at her and saying, man, she'd be a great wife. I'd love to have her for a wife, but I'm not going to do that because that's his wife. Well, all of a sudden she's divorced, and she's divorced with a paper in her hand that says she's legitimately divorced, and now she is free to go marry somebody else. Is that God's original plan? No, it's not his original plan, but he's coming up with this plan because these guys' hearts are so hard, he needs to do something to protect these women who are being put away without good cause. And so he gave them this opportunity for divorce. And that's what Jesus says here. But he follows that up with the statement, from the beginning, it was not this way. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. He's bringing us back to the original plan of God, and he's holding us to that, making us responsible. Now, we're talking about human sexuality. This is the only legitimate context for the expression of legitimate human sexuality. Marriage. There's no other venue for it, if you will. No other situation in life where you can do this and it be all right. And that's what we're coming back to. It really simplifies everything. It's like the old adage, you don't need to know everything that makes a dollar bill counterfeit if you know what? If you know what makes it legitimate. Because you can look to say, okay, this is everything that needs to be legitimate. That's it. We don't need to worry about everything else. What about divorce? Well, you don't need to know about that if you know about marriage and if you'll keep marriage. Next arrow. Jesus being the fulfillment and therefore embodiment of the law. And this is from Matthew 5:17. Jesus said, I did not come to abolish the law, but to do what? To fulfill the law. And when he said he fulfilled the law, he validated every aspect of the law's governance over sexual behavior, precluding the need for him to address the moral nature of every sexual practice. In other words, the reason I put that in here, and you might want to make a note of this, and I probably should have just written it out. People are going to say to you, oh, well, Jesus never said anything about homosexuality, so it must not be that bad. He never talked about the practice of homosexuality. Well, for one thing, probably didn't have to in the first century because it probably wasn't that big a deal. And even those who would have practiced it would have known it's wrong. In first century Jewish culture, they would have known this is wrong, and he wouldn't have had to say anything. But when he said, I came to fulfill the law, he validated every aspect of the law. What did the law say about the practice of homosexuality? Abomination. It didn't just say it was a sin, it said it was an abomination, punishable by death. That's what it was. Now, somebody might say, oh, that's cruel to kill somebody because they're homosexual. No. People were killed because they acted on that, and they knew the law. This wasn't something that was sprung on them. Okay, everybody's got all their practices, everything they want to do. Now we're just going to spring a new law that says, you're homosexual, you're going to die. No, the law was given on Mount Sinai to the Jewish people. They knew what it was. If you read, Moses gathered them at God's command on two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. And what happened? He read the law. And everybody on Mount Gerizim pronounced the curses against those who would fail to keep the law, and everybody on Mount Ebal pronounced the blessings on those who would keep the law. And when they were done, the people said together, we will keep this law. And what did Moses say? You won't do it, because he knew him. Same thing Joshua would say later on. Joshua was leading alongside Moses, and he knew the people as well as Moses did. But the bottom line is, Jesus was the fulfillment of the law, and the law condemned the practice of homosexuality. So yes, Jesus addressed it when he said he was the fulfillment of the law that condemned it. Am I making sense? Anybody got any questions about that? So next time somebody says Jesus never said anything about the practice of homosexuality, what will you say? He didn't have to. And why did he not have to? It's in the law, and he said he was the fulfillment of the law. To me, that's a huge point. For anybody who's looking for truth, the truth is here. This is why Paul wrote what he did that we just read in 2 Corinthians 10. The Word of God's powerful for dealing with speculations. When people who are looking for truth read these things, they see, oh, okay, so my speculation was false. It's not true that Jesus did not address the practice of homosexuality. He did when he said he was the fulfillment of the law, because the law addressed that practice and said it was wrong. Romans chapter 1, 18 to 32. I want you to go there with me. Well, I want you to look up every passage we go to. But this is where Paul, in the first 3 chapters, is proving to the reader that everybody is under sin. And in this particular context, he's very specific about the kind of sin, and he stays on the point almost as if God could see this coming down the pike. And those folks in the late 20th and early 21st century, they're going to need this. So let's put it in the book. Verse 20. I said 18. You could start at 18. Well, start at 18 because it says something similar to 2 Corinthians 10. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who do what? Hinder the truth. What's another word? Suppress. We don't want this getting out. Do you think the media ever suppresses anything? Or do you think the media ever focuses on one thing more than on another? I don't know all the details of what goes on, but I know that Paul wrote this 2,000 years ago, and it's a tendency all the time that people who don't want the truth will suppress the truth. There are people in the process of rewriting our American history right now because they don't want people to know today the things that happened 200 years ago. They're suppressing the truth in unrighteousness because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For example, evolution in schools. Should we teach evolution in schools? Should we teach creation in schools? What we should do is say, here's the so-called theory of evolution. Here's what the Bible says about creation. Here's the science. And if you look at the real science, and of course we all know that this is going to be governed by whoever the teachers are, and they're going to give it a bent, the press. But the bottom line is, if we allow people to look at both ideas objectively, choose their own, then that would be at least fair. But the folks who believe in evolution do not even want the mention of creation in the classroom. And my question is, if creation is such a stupid thing for people to believe in, then why not let it be mentioned so that all the little children can see how foolish the idea of creation is? And that way, they'll come to evolution naturally. But it's not going to happen because people are suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. And they don't want people to know about God. It's not just a culture. It's the devil. And he's been doing this forever. Verse 20, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what's been made, so that they're without excuse. Even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their what? In their thinking, in their speculations. This is the word here one more time. We're back to this idea of speculation. Their thinking. And their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. The gods of ancient Egypt, what were they patterned after? Animals. There might have been some human physiology mixed in the form, but they were always patterned after some animal. You look at animals, what do animals produce except other animals? It doesn't even make sense to look at animals and say, that's our God. What did they make at the foot of Mount Sinai? A calf. Now somebody might argue, oh yeah, but the calf's where they got all their food and their milk and their hides to make. Well, yeah, but the calf's not the God, is it? The calf is the resource that the true and living God gave us to take that calf and to make it say, that calf is our God. It's pretty stupid. It's just stupid. And that's what Paul is saying. Professing to be wise, they became fools. Verse 24, therefore, God gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to, what's the word you have in your text? Impurity. So that their bodies would be, what? Dishonored. There's honor and there's dishonor. And God gave them over to impurity so that they would be dishonored. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator who's blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them over to what? Degrading passions. What does it mean to degrade? You reduce the value. Okay. When you reduce the value, you reduce the quality, it's degraded. It's not as good. Go buy a brand new car and drive it off the lot, what happens? It's immediately degraded simply by the fact that it's had an owner and you've driven it on the street. You can't get the same money for it. Yes? Oh, yeah. Yeah, finally, they need to be degraded. Oh, really? That's the actual term they're using. Okay, they're reducing the quality. Well, that's an interesting way to put it. Degrading passions, back in 26, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. Paul, bless his heart, he did not know about being politically correct. In the same way also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another. Men with men committing what? Indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. Do you know what I think of when I read verse 27? I think of AIDS. I think of AIDS. That as well, but you don't have to be homosexual to get those. But the thing about AIDS is, what does AIDS do but degrade your God-given immune system so that every other possible sexually transmitted disease is going to wreak havoc with your system? C. Everett Koop used to be the Surgeon General. And he said, there is no malady known to man that's so seemingly well designed to reduce an entire generation of humanity. Surgeon General was at one time. Yes.
They have run by the idea that homosexuality is genetically brought on man. In other words, he couldn't help himself.
Right.
This answers that quite clearly. The source or cause of this is they burn in their lust. It goes back to a degraded or defiled heart.
Yes.
It's not genetics, it's lust.
Yes. They burned. There was a spark. They could have put it out, but they didn't. I tell you what, we're not going to be able to finish this sheet, and these texts are right here. You can look at them yourself. Let me pass out this sheet here, and I want to show you what's on this so you can take this home and read it for yourself. I think we've got enough. If we don't, we'll make some more. I can't remember if I had her make 30 or 35. Let's go ahead and pass over the first two paragraphs for the sake of time. What he says there is essentially the same thing we said as we were talking about the film, that just because you feel something doesn't mean that's what you are. Anybody see the special on the Carpenters this last week on OETA? It's been shown before, but y'all know the music of the Carpenters, Karen and Richard Carpenter. Marvelous music. How did she die? Anorexia. What's anorexia? It's an eating disorder is what they call it, but it's really a mental disorder, because I forget how much she weighed. It was like 80-some pounds when she died, but she looked in the mirror and she thought she was fat. That's a mental disorder. It's tragic that she died that way, because she was such a wonderful human being and had such a talent and a voice and touched the lives of so many people through her music, but she got this wrong idea that she was fat and died because of it. Just because you think something doesn't make it okay. And he uses her as an example. Maybe that's what it was. All right, you see where it says sexuality and gender findings from a biological, physiological, and social sciences. This study, conducted by world-renowned Johns Hopkins University scientists Dr. Lawrence S. Mayer and Dr. Paul R. McHugh, is a meta-analysis of the data from over 200 peer-reviewed and left-leaning studies regarding sexual orientation and gender identity. It was published in the fall of 2016, the fall edition, 2016 fall edition of the New Atlantis Journal, and is far and away the most objective, exhaustive, and comprehensive study on the topic to date. The understanding, first point, of sexual orientation as an innate biologically fixed property of human beings, the idea that people are born that way, is not supported by scientific evidence. So here you've got it, not supported by scientific evidence. Sexual orientation, the second bullet point, in adolescence is fluid over the life course for some people, with one study estimating that as many as 80% of male adolescents who report same-sex attractions no longer do so as adults. What does that mean? That means when you're young and you don't even know what you are. As far as I'm not saying you don't know what you are as far as male and female, but you don't know, you're looking for your identity is what I'm trying to say. And some of these kids, with today's culture and the influences of all these falsehoods, are starting to think, oh, you know, I might be homosexual. No, you're not. And they're forming their ideas about themselves, but what this finding says is that when they get to be adults, most of those who had any inclination when they were younger stop having those. I want to draw your attention, though, to the next one. Yeah, the third bullet point. Compared to heterosexuals, non-heterosexuals are about 2 to 3 times as likely to have experienced childhood sexual abuse. Now, think about that, because when you read some of the rest of these, it's going to help explain some of that. People who identify as homosexuals have been 2 to 3 times more likely exposed to childhood sexual abuse. The next, it doesn't say. Gay identified people are at an elevated risk for a variety of adverse health and mental health outcomes. What's that saying? Well, if you were sexually abused as a child, you're being set up for more mental health issues later on in life. And to me, the response would be, duh. If you're a child and some adult is messing with you sexually, you know instinctively that's not right. I was 6 years old when a cousin of mine tried to show me something about sex. I remember this because it was an intense experience I had, and I knew then that ain't right. You're not supposed to do that. He never touched me, did anything to me, but at 6 years old, I'm telling you what my older cousin was telling me. I knew at 6 years old he was wrong. And it wasn't because mommy or daddy had to tell me specifically that this was wrong. I just knew. And you may have something like that in your history that you know that's not right. It's just natural. And unless somebody messes with that to get you screwed up, it'll stay natural. Gay identified people are at an elevated risk. Oh, we read that one. Gay identified people experience nearly 2.5 times the risk of suicide. Well, it goes back, I think, to the likelihood of them being sexually abused. Not just that, but people know this is not the way it's supposed to be. We don't have time, that's the second bell. But I will challenge you to do this and keep a log of it. Keep a piece of paper and a pen near your television set. And when you're watching TV, especially like late night talk shows, you'll hear guys make remarks and they'll say something that lets you know they know that being gay is not something you want. Jay Leno made a remark. Even the more liberal, who was the other guy, not that replaced him, but some of these late night talk shows. And it's not anything they say overtly, but you catch it because they'll say something and you'll know the tenor of what they're saying is, I don't want to be gay. I don't want anybody to think I'm gay. Well, why wouldn't you if that's perfectly normal? Is it okay if somebody thought that Jay Leno was a man? Well, sure. Yeah, I'm a man. I'm a big, virile, strapping man, he might think, but don't let anybody think I'm gay because that's not the way it's supposed to be. More and more and more, I hear these kinds of comments on TV because people just know. They just know. It's so natural. Well, I'm sorry to bring this in so late. Go ahead and read it for yourselves. I just want you to have this so you'll know